Good morning, dear friends. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce our Dharma talk today on wisdom by Jim Barrett, who has the Dharma name of True Transmission of the Dharma. So a lot to live up to, but I know he's up for it. I have the great honor and privilege of meeting with Jim every week. And I get a chance to taste and collect some of his wisdom over all of these years. He's more housebound these days, but he still teaches for the Southside group. And I'm so happy that he was able to do this. When we were looking at the list of the Paramitas, it was, and I was so glad he accepted. I said, well, this is the one to go. Jim would be the best to talk about wisdom. And so I give you to him, and we will have a wonderful talk here, and then maybe a little discussion. Thank you, Jim, for your attendance today.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for coming. Dear Tay, dear Sangha, dear esteemed teacher, thank you all for coming. Everybody has so many demands on their lives today, so many places that you could be, so many things that you could be doing, and yet you choose to be here. And we thank you deeply from the bottom of our hearts. Today is Wednesday morning, August 3rd, 9:39, right at the instant at my location. And I'm Jim Barrett, and I'm zooming from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to the Milwaukee Mindfulness Center's annual retreat at the Christine Center. As Paul mentioned, in October of 2017, at the Magnolia Grove Monastery, I was ordained with the name True Transmission of the Dharma. As Paul taught me, almost the first thing that he taught me was that I probably don't have an original thought in my head, but what I do have is 2,600 years worth of backstory. And so we go on with that. I'm a simple peasant, entitled to nothing and expecting less. My world is a reflection of my thoughts, and my thoughts are a reflection of my world. I make no insistence on the truth of any words I say today. They're just my understanding of my research, and they're always subject to reassessment. The first of the 5 mindfulness trainings tells us that seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. Harmful actions do not usually show wisdom in my experience. So let's explore this subject a little bit. And as I always like to remind folks of the quote from our friend Shunryo Suzuki, the little Suzuki, what we do here is so important, we must be sure not to take it too seriously. So, last year I had the opportunity to speak on compassion. And compassion was so tightly involved and linked with wisdom that actually after a while it becomes compound word, compassionate wisdom. You can't have one without the other, or you shouldn't have one without the other. But for today, we'll be talking about prajna, or wisdom. And of course, the first thing is to try and define such a thing. And that's way over my pay grade. So I'll offer you from the 6th Patriarch's Dharma Jewel Platform Sutra. Good and wise friends, what is prajna? In our language, prajna means wisdom in every place and in every moment, in thought, after thought, never becoming muddled and constantly acting wisely. Just this is practicing prajna. With one deluded thought, prajna is cut off. With one wise thought, prajna springs to life. Ordinary people, muddled and confused, fail to recognize prajna. Their mouths talk about the prajna, but their minds remain confused. They're forever saying, I cultivate prajna. And though they talk on and on about emptiness, they have no idea of its true meaning. Prajna has no shape or form. It is only the mind of wisdom. If you understand it in this way, just this is prajna wisdom. So I was really taken with that. And one of the reasons I was really taken with that was because in my very early years, one of my favorite authors had one character ask another character, what is wisdom? And after a discussion, they finally came up with, wisdom is the ability to have appropriate action all the time, no matter what the circumstances. The ability to respond appropriately in a given situation. Today's book, Understanding Our Mind, tells us in verse 33 that consciousness gives rise to discrimination and comparison. This is self, and that is other than self. This discrimination and comparison, while valuable in many ways, always gives rise to our attachments and our delusions. Our chant, Affirming Faith in Mind, tells us the great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. When preferences are cast aside, the way stands clear and undisguised. But even slight distinctions made set earth and heaven far apart. If you would clearly see the truth, discard opinions pro and con. To founder in dislike and like is nothing but the mind's disease. So, with all this attachments and delusions, how do we know what's appropriate? What makes our decision of what's appropriate action or appropriate thought at any given moment right? Well, there's something that we call in our lineage Buddha nature. And I have a dear friend who calls the same thing Christ consciousness, and I'm sure every spirituality has their own version of it. Our friend Yongey Mingye Rinpoche of the Turgers, he calls it the diamond of our Buddha nature. And it's wonderful and it's pure until and unless it gets clouded by our defilements, by our attachments, by our delusions. And in a discussion about impermanence, someone asked me, well, you keep telling me that nothing is permanent. How about our Buddha nature? And I had to say, well, I guess you're kind of right, but I will say that our Buddha nature appears to fluctuate like any other phenomena as it grows and shrinks and is clouded and unclouded by our attachments and delusions. Where do our attachments and delusions come from? All sorts of places. And that's another entire chapter in the verse. So, but some of them are inherited. Some of them are created. Some of them are built into our brains. Paul and I had a discussion about that. Delusions, the delusion that, I don't know, perhaps a social delusion about how your party felt about an election. That's one thing. But perhaps the delusion, the organic delusion of a schizophrenic could very well be a different thing. I don't know. The point being is that they are delusions and attachments. And from our tradition, we know that every time we touch one of them with mindfulness, it loses a little tiny bit of its hold over us. So attachments and delusions obscure our understanding of the true nature of the universe, the inexplicable binding of interbeing and impermanence. So much suffering wrapped up into the ignorance of this process. This is the true nature of the universe as far as I can tell. I'll take them one at a time. Inner being. Neither one of these concepts is this difficult, but applying them together can be a little bit more. A quick glimpse of interbeing, and I bet everybody's probably heard this one before. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the horse was lost. For want of the horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. Now, of course, we can ponder the series of phenomena, interbeing phenomena that surrounded the blacksmith who forged the nail, the apprentice who handled the bellows for him, the wife or mother who made the breakfast for them. And you can just keep going on and on and on. The interbeing of one lost nail. Smile at it and don't let it give you a headache. If you don't have anything else to do sometime and you'd like a break from whatever it is you normally do on the cushion, pick an item, any item, whatever, and just sit down and ponder its interbeing. So interbeing is the power going down because Homer Simpson found the last donut. Got involved in it. The interbeing of something, how it's intertwined with the world around it, the universe around it, defines it as a phenomenon. And all phenomena are temporary because the things that they consist of are constantly changing. So if we truly understand this concept of interbeing, then it all flows a lot better. There is no, always we find that the difficulty lies in the struggle. Impermanence. Impermanence simply is. The observed, again, one from one of my favorite authors, the observed phenomena requires no explanation. It simply exists. That's all. Impermanence is, for very obvious reasons, if you examine the world of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and we'll remember, I'll remind you that we're 1.8 million years as hunter-gatherers and less than 15,000 years as something other. But the desire for permanence is built into us, and we desperately seek it. Which is not to say that with the wonderful plasticity of the human mind, we can't change that. So impermanence generally causes fear and anxiety in many and most people. It's been my observations, and a lot of folks agree that this fear and anxiety can only last so long before it becomes anger. And perhaps that's a problem with part of the problem with what's happening in our world today is that things are so very impermanent and people are so afraid of that impermanence. There's science. I'm so happy to see my friend Shivangi here. There's science. I found a wonderful blog by her husband, Daniel, talking about how a real possibility, something showing real help or promise is simply teaching people that it's all right. There's a lot of people who had to get used to impermanence. Impermanence doesn't cause suffering. It's the struggle against impermanence. It's kind of, which one might call acceptance, but then I have to point out that acceptance is not agreement. And now we come back to the old serenity prayer. You know, help me to change the things that I can't and accept the things that I can't and know the differences, that kind of stuff. So, but impermanence will put a kink in your brain in regards to those things. It's as complex as the Big Bang and as elemental as a newborn baby. So if you doubt impermanence and you're a business person, go order 1,000 business cards. I've actually had the world change drastically between the time I ordered business cards and the time they got to me, so. The sun, we'll ask examples of permanence, and someone will say, oh, the sun always rises in the east. Nope, sorry. Some days it rises in the east, sometimes in the southeast. The point is that it's constantly changing. And of course, now we come back to our old paradigm of the river, which we can go out there and we can call that thing the Mississippi, but that's just a convenience for that slot. If we put our foot into that river one time and pull it out, the next time we put it in, it is not. It's different. It's always, things are always changing. Now, for those who are really uncomfortable with this idea of impermanence, is there nothing permanent? And my response is, I don't know. My research lends to say no, but the fact of the matter is that's because it's entwined with interbeing. If you could find me something that did not have any kind of interbeing involved, that it stood on its own all by itself with no constituent elements coming from anywhere else, bring it to me. I'd be glad to talk to you about that. So it's an uncomfortable feeling, this business of dealing with impermanence. Boy, is it uncomfortable. So my response to that is just as just about anything, go to the cushion with it. Just go to the cushion, get it, and sit with it. So neat, nifty, and far out. I think we got an idea of what we think what I think I'm talking about. Whether that's what it truly is or not is I don't know. But well, what does this stuff look like in real life? And we use our innate wisdom when making decisions based on the wisdom of reducing aggression and fostering compassion. That's the concept for me. The idea of this appropriate wisdom is always used when making decisions, big decisions, small decisions, conscious decisions, subconscious decisions. Start off by catching as many decisions as you can as you go through your day and decide, this I will decide on compassion. This I will decide on compassion. I remarked to myself that those of us who follow this path, one would think, conditionally we think it's free, but when in actuality it's more restricted, because everything we do must be grounded in the basis of compassion. So this wisdom, remember way back at the beginning I was talking about compassion and wisdom being intertwined. This wisdom in the real world means basing our decisions on the concept of compassion, reducing aggression and fostering compassion. I remind us of Thich Nhat Hanh's paradigm with the boat and the sanity, that as people were escaping down the rivers and oceans and seas from Vietnam, the boats were often dreadfully overloaded. And Tay tells us that all it would take would be one person to do unwise things, to go crazy, and the entire boat would sink and everybody would die. But he said, by the flip side, all it takes is one wise person, one sane person to be there and save everyone. And I offer to you that we all have our own little boats. We have our boat of the place we live in. We have our boat of the place we work in. We have the boat of our Sangha. We have so many little boats in our lives. And odds are that all it really takes is when one person in the boat begins to get outraged, upset, about to act not sane, we come to them. Oh, I understand, my dear friend. How can we help? Let us be sane together. So, and if each one of us did that, then who's to know what changes we could make. I wish to be the sane one in my boat. So to be able to say, I might be wrong, or as my dear friend Paul might say, I might be partially correct. A lessening of the ego. This is, I can't help thinking about this as a formula. The constants are impermanence and interbeing. The variables are life's chaos, which is that of being human. And the operatives are to reduce aggression and increase compassion. And this can be, it can be described, I'm certain, I know my dear friend is, the mathematician described it in a mathematical expression, but I'm not absolutely certain that it's a mathematical formula. I think it's a life formula coming from here and in here. And all we really need to know is that our wisdom should lead us to compassion. Solve for serenity. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to see if we can turn our little my computer around so you can see people. I don't know if this is going to work or not, guys, but we'll see.
I recognize that ceiling.
There are the people under the ceiling.
There are
There we
people
go.
under the ceiling.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So nice to see you all.
So thank you. So we have time for any kind of discussion, anything that came up from that. And Jim, I hope you don't mind if I lead it off by asking a question.
Not a problem.
There's a term that has been often used called idiot compassion, where you do the kindest thing for a person and it may not be to their benefit. The classic example is the person who is clearly down and out and in poor health, begging for money in front of the liquor store. That kind of thing. Can you address how to be compassionate in times when it seems like the thing to do is not necessarily to give? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That's wonderful. Idiot compassion. Well, to be perfectly honest, in the vast majority of situations that I can think of, if whatever it is you're doing feels comfortable, it's probably idiot compassion. If you're well, like for instance, we in Milwaukee, we have these people who stand around in the medians and ask for money. And the guy's sign came up and it said, need gas, and need money for gas. And I handed him some money and he looked at me and he said, not many people stop right this time of the day. And I said, it's a matter of compassion, my friend. I've been there. I know what that's about, So idiot compassion is generally considered the idea of doing what's easiest. But you notice that there's no compassionate wisdom there involved. Idiot compassion is really easy to have if you're not operating with wisdom. So yeah, like for instance, someone doing something bad to themselves, something that you think is bad for them. How do we know that this is not a change that they need to go through? I don't know. So anyway, like I said, it's just been my experience, especially with the path, is that the part that seems the path that seems the hardest is probably the path that you need to be taking. But just me. So
Thanks, Jim. We'll take questions in the center, but I just want to ask the people on Zoom. I have Jim on speaker right now, so he's the only person that I will see. But if you use the raise hand function, if you know how to do that, I can get you to Jim to respond to that. So are there people in the center here who have a question or a comment? Not many takers yet, Jim. You're way too clear.
It's a simple message, my friend.
Nancy, if you could come up to the mic, Nancy, thanks.
Is that here now?
I don't know. I don't really know. We'll see. Jim, tell us if you can hear Nancy.
Can
Okay.
you hear me, Jim?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Nancy bowing in. So nice to see you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm listening.
So nice to see you and thank you for this talk. I really appreciate the simplicity of what you say. As with everything from this week so far, simple, but not always easy to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you, Nancy. The whole idea, we spend so much time and so much energy searching for the meaning of life, for the existence of the world, all of these other things. The only thing I think I've got going is that got going for me is almost 70 years worth of life, and a large portion of that was spent in spiritual understanding and spiritual seeking. So I can almost, it feels like I can take just about anybody's sense of suffering and pull it apart and examine it in the light of impermanence and interbeing. And as a matter of fact, research tells us that one of the most effective ways of dealing with this problem with impermanence is to lead the subject to quotations from all over all through history about the poets, the artists and stuff, who the writers who said it's okay to be uncertain. It's all right for the world not to be permanent. So.
Yes, Anne.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for being here. Sort of a simple question, and maybe it'll open up some discussion too. I have the word compassion. I don't know if it's an action, if it's a thing. You know, we talked about appropriate action and whether or not an action is appropriate for one person in a situation and a different action might be appropriate. Can you talk a little bit about what compassion is, what it looks like, and maybe what it might not be? We talked a little bit about idiot compassion, but I've read definitions of it and I'm still sort of, it seems nebulous to me.
Well, thank you. I can certainly see that. From my learning, compassion always starts from a place of that could be me. The person, there is no sense of help. I am the helper. This is the helpee. Compassion doesn't come from those places. I'm trying to remember, the near enemy of compassion is pity. And the far enemy of compassion is, I've forgotten off the top of my head, but the point is that the near enemy is something is that which could most closely resembles compassion. But as far as I can tell, compassion always starts from a place of this could be me. Or I could have been there, an identification with that. So after that, it's probably the beginnings of, if there is such a thing, of altruistic attitudes. I'm going to know a lot of people who would deny that there is such a thing as altruism in humans, but if there is, compassion is what causes it to spring forth. So
Yes, Greg.
I think we're getting less participation because most of us don't want to walk up here. Hi, Jim, and thank you so much for your words. I really appreciated them. I'm thinking about drawing a distinction between compassion and wisdom. And compassion seems to be more heart-centered. It's and I'm feeling with the other person. So that thing of what you just said about being able to put yourself in their shoes and imagine what you'd like. So kindness seems to spring from compassion. But compassion, as Paul said, could be idiot compassion. So if we bring our heads and our hearts, so we bring our heads for the purpose of discernment to inform our hearts that are in a kind, compassionate place. That may be one way of thinking about wisdom. It's when our head and our heart come together.
Thank you. It's wonderful. I guess I hadn't thought about it from that point of view. And one of the reasons is because whether I say it or not, I'm inevitably and invariably referring to compassionate wisdom. Man, knowing we have this Buddha nature, and knowing that this Buddha nature works on compassionate wisdom automatically, once we get our desire, our attachments and delusions out of the way, well, that just makes it really simple. All we got to do is get rid of all those attachments and delusions. Yeah, but the one point about it is that it gives us a focus that's a little bit more narrow. I not only would not encourage, but I don't know how, knowing what I know through the research I've done over the last few years, I wouldn't even attempt to untwine or untwist compassion and wisdom. I think the idea I got one time was that wisdom without compassion might lead you to do something for people that to or with someone that, while in the long run it might be better for them, the cost might be just tremendous. The cost in pain or the cost in social economic things, So the big thing about all of this, everything, when you tie together this impermanence and interbeing stuff, is that even if it turned out that 5 minutes ago you were right, there's no guarantee that 5 minutes from now you're going to be wrong, or at least less than right, And to be able to, like, this concept of interbeing, just pulls and pulls and pulls and pulls, and you can have sometimes the most decisive changes, pivotal changes happen in the universe because of some of the most insignificant things. So.
Thanks, Jim. Stephanie, thank you.
Stephanie bowing in. Thank you, Jim. This is perhaps vague, but I'm curious what your thoughts will be. If everything is impermanent, would you call the fear of permanence a delusion?
A fear, would a fear of permanence be a delusion? Probably. Anything, it's almost as if no, let me take that back. It would depend on how you held on to this attitude, if you held on to it with both hands kicking and screaming, it'll never ever change. This is the way. Impermanence will never ever change. I sit here and I say that the nature of the universe is impermanence and interbeing. And you can say to me, will impermanence never change? I gotta say, I don't know. But I could have said, I don't know, way farther up the pipe. And it's all right by me, because the one thing, to me, the one thing that my path and my path through Buddhism has been that this is a function of the ego. And I've got to be able to stop and say, I might be wrong. Or in light of interbeing, it's almost certain that there are things about the situation that I do not know. And we'll come back to our one of our 5 mindfulness trainings, where we make a promise not to repeat information that we don't know to be true, not to use divisive language. So in light of the fact that no matter what it is, it could be the breathing of the person next to you. You do not know what the interbeing in regards to that is. So got to ask yourself, or you got to remind yourself, I could be wrong. You know, and I understand how difficult that is. And that's why I often, almost always, defer to Paul when he prefers to say, maybe I'm only partially right. You know, my son does that to me. I think you're partially right, Dad. And I bow and I bow to him because he's absolutely correct. So
Thanks. Larry.
Good morning.
good morning, Larry.
As we're talking, I'm recalling a bit about the days here at the retreat, and I think we certainly gain a lot of wisdom for these days. The thing that occurred to me is that often we look at wisdom as something to be gained. But I'm also aware from my experience this week is that wisdom is also a function of letting go. That often, and maybe that's where some of the cloud comes in, that blurs the Buddha nature. So many times I think we have become so attached to our wisdom that we're just not open at all to something that really truly wants. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, wisdom about our wisdom. I got a feeling if you actually started looking around and paying attention, you would, well, as a matter of fact, it was in the quote one of the quotes that I started about. Their mouths talk about prajna, but their minds remain confused. They are forever saying, I cultivate prajna. You know, yeah, but it's an elemental thing. We can't overthink it. You know, it's just one of those things. So.
Ro?
Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
So I really was impressed by your mentioning impermanence as being one of the reasons, our fear of it as being one of the reasons we're currently in a state of high anxiety and fear. The threat of losing what we have. If I'm right, that's what you referred to.
Right.
And I think about our creation stories, especially the Christian one, as it relates to that same fear about leaving or losing the Garden of Eden, and the shame that went with that, and that quality of having done something wrong, that we did, bit the apple, took capitalism too seriously. We did something it's a causal kind of experience where, so I'm trying to find out, how do we sit on our cushions and think about our relationship to kind of the emotional, obviously we're attached to something, or we think that we are deserving of something. And I'm just wondering how we work with that and get out of the egoic, this attachment and relationship that thinks we're entitled to all of these things that we seem to have absolutely no, we cannot grasp. We cannot, it's just like, that's just the nature of it. And that's the wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I started off at the very beginning. I'm a simple peasant, entitled to nothing and expecting less. And this is an attitude I've been cultivating for quite some number of years. No, attachments and delusions. They're there, they come. Like for instance, the attachments that cause when your family does something and it triggers an attachment or it triggers something within you. As my friend, as one of my dear Sangha friends once said, of course your family pushes your buttons, they help to install them, you know? You have to be aware of that. And that's part of what mindfulness is not necessarily no earth-shaking, groundbreaking stuff. It's walking along through your daily life, being aware of what you're feeling and you know what's going on around you. So I'm sorry, I've kind of gotten away from the question. So thank you. Want to try again? Try somebody else.
Tony?
Good morning, Jim, and thank you so much. So rich. When you talk about impermanence, I think about, for example, how it plays out in the mornings when I go approach the cushion. Each day being so different. And sometimes I'm inclined to just sort of be with, you know, however I'm feeling. Other times I really want to have high value at that time I'm sitting down. And so whatever words you can offer in terms of lessons you've learned on that cushion in terms of cultivating wisdom and compassion would be much appreciated. Thank you.
I'm sorry, would you repeat the last little bit with your question?
Okay, I'll rewind. Impermanence, just please share a couple of insights of what, in the face of impermanence, when you're meditating, how you bring impermanence into your meditation and what helps cultivate wisdom and compassion on this.
Oh, thank you so very much for the question. Let's see. Impermanence gets me through my life and through my day. When I go to the cushion, my body is doing things that can often be unpleasant. No, they're always unpleasant. And if it wasn't the idea that this is impermanent and it will eventually change, I do not know how I would be able to move from day to day. So that's fairly easy for me. One of the practices, of course, if most people, when they begin their practice, they practice with the idea of loving kindness for themselves and those beyond them and everything. One of my favorite and most esteemed teachers on compassion is Pema Chodron. And Pema Chodron Ani Pema fully believes that any problem in the universe can be solved with a process called Tonglen. And essentially, if ordinarily I'm sitting here and I'm breathing in peace and serenity for myself, and I'm breathing out my tension and anxiety, when I go through Tonglen, I am breathing in the tension and anxiety of the people around me, and I am breathing out peace and serenity to them, or I'm breathing in whatever negative emotion they are feeling, and I'm breathing out to them whatever positive emotion they need. And that helps. She says, Ani Pema says that Tonglen is the basis of compassion, that if we practice it like that. In order to, for my own self, I have something called the lighted window meditation. And the lighted window meditation usually starts about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I remind myself that I'm sitting there with my pain in a lighted window. And somewhere nearby, there's someone else with a lighted window. And if I have to feel my pain, how about if I go ahead and feel your pain for you? And I don't know of another basis for compassion than that. But that's the basis, that's the path that a bodhisattva walks, which is that people will suffer. I've made a study of suffering, and if you're gonna, if the suffering has to be, then let me take it out. So the lighted window meditation has gotten me through many, many, many nights, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and knowing that this discomfort, this suffering, connects the entire universe, all the people, it connects the entire human race and the entire universe.
Thanks, Jim. Meredith.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Meredith. It's so nice to see you.
I think of you often, even though we don't see each other. I think language plays tricks on us. For example, we talk about wisdom, which is a noun, as if it were something graspable, something we can achieve and hold and bring out of the cabinet when we needed it. But I think that in the Dharma, it's more often understood to be something which is relational, and it's the way in which you acquire and use knowledge. For example, when I view a situation and I am reactive to it through my habit energy, I'm very likely unwise, unless I have really good habit energy. But I don't think I do. In fact, it's a process of gathering the kind of information and taking into account the causes and conditions in a specific situation. We don't have a book of casuistry that tells us the right thing to do in every situation. So wisdom is in the way in which we try to apply those things we've learned. And I'm saying that as a positive statement, but there's really a question mark behind that. And I think compassion can be described in much the same way, because if we say I have compassion, it's as if I had an object I could hold. But I can't. It's based on my relationship and the way I take causes and conditions into account when I make a choice to try to help reduce the suffering of myself and others. And it doesn't always mean that it leads to skillful action, but it means that through the best understanding I have of how to reduce suffering, the most compassionate choice is this. But that's provisional and not permanent knowledge. And I may not be compassionate tomorrow, and I may not be wise tomorrow, but I know how to get to it if I continue practicing and reducing my reactivity, by understanding that the world I look at is the world I've created in my head. And that much of that wisdom is getting to the heart of that world without the projections of Meredith on it. And that was a question.
Not a problem. Thank you so very much. That's wonderful. And And I am reminded of this past weekend. My wife and her sisters went on a trip and left me at home with our two cats. And on Sunday night, Saturday night, one of the cats was just forlorn because cat mom wasn't home. And he wandered around annoying me for the longest time until finally I yelled at him so loud that he disappeared for a day and a half. And when my wife came home, she's looking, her eyes are cutting around. She said, "What'd you do with my cat?" And I said, "Well, I yelled, he disappeared. I yelled, he levitated, he disappeared, you know." I said, I would have wished that I could have handled that more, wisely. Every time I do that, I say I would have wished that I could have handled that more wisely. Instead of, I didn't exercise wisdom at this time. I instead turn around and say, "Wow, I noticed what I did." You know, I actually noticed but as I was taught, even when you're not mindful, it teaches you a lesson about mindfulness. So that's where I come from, which is that I think in another tradition they call it progress, not perfection. And if I can simply become aware of, and I had that happen not too long ago in an interpersonal exchange with someone very difficult in my life. And I was aware and I was intentional about it. And I worked very hard to reduce the aggression and increase the compassion. Hey, it starts with anything else in mindfulness, which is being aware of it. And if you're aware, that's a step in the right direction.
Thanks, Jim. Chris? Make him take this long journey across the hall.
Back in the room. Hi, Jim, Chris calling in. Simple as elegant, and your Dharma talk was very elegant. Sometimes we preach that being the best is not the way to go, but to be your best. So I'm wondering if when you try to be your best, try to be better, and it's kind of our goal to do good. Do you gain more if you go about it intentionally, or if you allow things to just come to you, or both, or are they somewhat equal?
Thank you so very much. In the first place, one of my watch phrases is no struggle, no suffering. This business of the suffering against impermanence, suffering within inner being, almost exclusively. It's not the interbeing or the impermanence that brings suffering. It's the struggle against it. And the second, another aspect is that I am either a project perpetually in construction, or I'm a lost cause, one or the other. I do not know. It's been so long. I practiced the path, and some things, but to be better, I don't know. I don't think that necessarily at my point in the path do I have an intention to be better. Because remember, we go back to our affirming faith and mind. This is part of, the discrimination and comparison, and getting away from that. So it becomes a case of, as an example, so I've had more than one person say to me, "You realize that you have a smile on your face when you're meditating." And the stock response I always have is, if you heard the crap that was going on in my mind, you'd smile too. And it's always there, that internal dialogue, but that doesn't mean I have to give it any credence, you know, it's just like, but I get a kick out of it because, for instance, I'm sitting watching television and invariably Joe Namath comes on and starts screaming about making sure you get everything you deserve from Social Security. Come on, guy, give me a break. And there's this constant attitude running through that we have to be number one, we have to be the best. One of my favorite examples, and please don't anybody strike me down, but I live not too far from a church that's called St. Gregory the Great. And I'm certain that it is, but I was kind of like to see the church called St. Anthony of the so-and-so, you know? For years, decades, literally for decades, I had the same mechanic that worked on my cars. And for a while I was driving some cars that needed a lot of work. And the name of the guy's business was Ray's Okay Service. It didn't have to be the finest service. It didn't have to be the most expensive service. It just needed to be okay, you know? So I try to make it through my life. Number one, by my definition, sin is hurting other people, or hurting other creatures. So I go through my world simply trying to figure out how and what and why I'm doing things. And, you know, I kind of sort of like being awake kind of mode, you know, and doing the best I can not to hurt people, you know. And after that, I kind of almost think that I think that's a really good springboard for compassion on my part, which is trying to be good to myself and trying not to hurt people, not to hurt the people around me, the world around me, I should say.
Dear friends, I just want to check with the people who are online. I don't know if anybody there has a question or a comment for Jim. I'm getting you all on gallery now so I can actually see you. Peggy just put up a heart. How nice. Thank you, Peggy. Cornelia, thank you.
Dear Ty, dear Noble Sangha, dear Jim, thank you for your insightful Dharma talk. Having just spoken about generosity, I do have a bit of a problem with the term idiot compassion. Really rubs me the wrong way, because who is to say, who is the judge of that? And I think, in terms of compassion or generosity, it all goes together. Who's to say that to give or not to give is not compassionate? It can be compassionate not to give. So it's all really well to, think about impermanence, think about interbeing, about all of that. But I feel like one shouldn't get too hooked up on analyzing all of that, because that's a lot of thinking with the brain. And sometimes we need to think more with the heart. And whether that's the right thing or not the right thing, it's always in the moment. We all have our delusions about whether we do the right thing or the wrong thing, or could be have done something better. But to use the heart a little bit more, rather than splitting hairs over all this terminology. And I wanted to share one, it's just a comment. I wanted to share a beautiful quote that I read while I was working on my talk about generosity. It's one by Picasso, which I would have last suspected to have said anything like this. And maybe it's not true that he said it. But he said, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And well, when we think about him, whenever we have our thoughts on Pablo Picasso's life, but I thought that was really beautiful. to think of it in that way. Find your gift and then find a way to give it away. Thank you. And thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cornelia. Lynn?
Yes, oops, thank you, Jim. I'm muted. I really appreciated the talk, and I just really liked what you said about attachment and delusion and touching that with mindfulness. It's kind of funny because on this retreat now, I'm seeming to be getting riled up. So I have to really calm myself down by using that method, by using my mindfulness and looking at what's happening, and that is wisdom. And it's just a comment. I think so.
Thank you. And to pop back to Cornelia's comment, you're absolutely correct. Who's to determine whether or not one is doing right or doing wrong? And again, I'll come back to affirming faith in mind. And where I seem to be coming from is that I'm having a tendency not to tag things, particularly things that I do, as right or wrong. Particularly in group with people in society, I will tag it as skillful or less than skillful. And to have interaction with someone, I had a fairly intense interaction with someone not too long ago. And I said afterwards, that was an intense way to deal with that situation. I would have preferred to have been more skillful about it. And I think, and that way I don't beat myself up. And as Paul and I have often discussed, with a certain mindset, you can be perfectly willing to make mistakes, because you can always shrug your shoulders and say, I made a mistake. I erred on the side of compassion. I'm going to make mistakes. And I'm not going to insist that my vision of the world is the vision of the world that needs to persist. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Bill?
Jim?
Hi
Thank
there.
you. Jim, we don't know each other well, but I feel like I know you better than you know me, because I've heard your wonderful talks. And I remember when you were attending these retreats, I believe, don't I go back that far? I think you were coming out here.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, I'm very moved by your lighted window meditation. I want to tell you that I think any aging person, such as myself, namaste. I'm sorry, what did you say, Jim?
And myself.
Well, yes, that considering the challenges of old age can be daunting, I would say. And I appreciate, if I may say, the courage and the patience that you apply in your own life. And I want to tell you, I appreciate that. And I wish you the best, and I wish myself the best. So far, so good. I'm still functioning, the body's still working. And I more or less anticipate there'll come a time when, sickness, old age, and death will occur. And I don't know what to say, but I feel a brotherhood with you, and I think it's really wonderful, Jim, that you're able to share with us, and a lot of experience. I know there's a lot of experience behind your work.
Thank you so very much. Yeah, Man, oh man, some days easy, some days hard, every day just as it should be. That's my attitude about it. And because of that, remember, I'll go back to the idea of no struggles, no suffering. So these challenges, so to speak, of getting old. Another little practice that I came up with. You see, I never know where these things came from. Odds are a lot of this stuff is just, it percolated down into my brain and I reassembled it in some way or another. But it has to do with, it's a part of the job or a part of the dance. Heard about the dance of life, the dance of the world. If you look at the world, the universe under a microscope, it's constantly moving, and it's constantly moving in a dance. And when I find myself trudging through my day, looking down at my feet to make sure that I don't misstep or something like that, whenever I catch myself, I smile. And I remind myself, well, my friend, it's a part of the job or a part of the dance, and you're the one who decides. With a little bit of input from the prefrontal cortex and some little bit of paranoia from the amygdala. It's a part of the job or a part of the dance. So it happens in here and in here. And yes, there are days when I would despair. There's days when I do despair. But again, I come back to this business of impermanence. And I know that, it will change. So, but thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Jim. Yes.
Good morning, Deborah Bowling. Thank you, Jim. Oh, was that a riddle that you posed for us about bringing you something permanent at the beginning of your talk?
Mm-hmm.
Impermanence.
Good question. Is impermanence permanent? Yeah. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
A magic that I've noticed of impermanence is that with awareness, it has the beauty and grace to constantly bring us back to this one breath, to this one moment, to the now. And that is really and truly all that we have. And for me, the greatest lesson that Tay granted while he was walking on this earth is that with that final exhale, we do become one with the interbeing, with that cloud in which we still see him. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah.
I will not allow regrets about the past, nor anxieties about the future. Remove me from this present moment, which is the only moment I truly have. And then I can turn around and look at the world through that lens of interbeing, and keeping in mind that there is no difference between the observer and the observed. I love that part because that's been a tenet in our tradition for years, decades, millennia. And now we're finding through quantum mechanics that it's absolutely true, that there's no difference between the observed and the observer. So we are all part of it. And this, the whole business is permanence and impermanence, because we would like to cling to our life and make that permanent. We become scared about the impermanence of death, and that's what throws people off, and then they get caught up in that. So
Thanks, Jen. May have time for maybe one more comment if people have anything. Yes. Bridget, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your embodied, compassionate wisdom. I felt the love of wisdom, a great love of wisdom, hard-earned and heartfelt. in your words, and I wanted to thank you. One of the great gifts that I'm finding in this practice is not only to better understand the practices of Buddhism, but the way that it reflects light on the Judeo-Christian practices that I'm more familiar with, and kind of illuminates both. And I don't know if this addresses, and it's maybe just a different perspective on your comment earlier, Rob. But I brought much of the conversation brought to mind the image from Proverbs in the Judeo-Christian text of wisdom as a female form. The Proverbs say, love her and she will watch over you. Wisdom is supreme. Therefore, get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. And those words kept coming to mind in terms of impermanence, in terms of it's both something you get and something you have to give, let go of everything to allow or to embody. And I love this embodiment of wisdom as, love her and she will watch over you like a mother. So I just wanted to thank you so much for embodying that for us and for the Sangha. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just had I am nowhere near expert with this Zoom, but I think it was Peggy that just popped up with online who asked me to repeat what it was that I said a few minutes ago. And I think what she was asking about, I will not allow regrets about my past, nor anxieties about my future. Remove me from the present moment, which is the only moment I truly have. And I will share with you that this is so necessary and so powerful for me, because my past was nowhere near what my world is now. And I'm approaching a part of my life where, of course, the future can certainly be considered indefinite, vague. Let's put it that way, vague to a certain extent. So especially being pulled back to the times, again, when I acted unwisely, and for me, the times that I hurt people. So.
Thank you, dear friends. I think it's about time to end, and I will say, Jim, we are so grateful for your sharing your wisdom, especially those of you who have been on retreat when Jim was here. We really feel that you're here, even when you're not physically present. And thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for sharing this wonderful part of your life with us. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And for those of you who perhaps might have questions, thoughts, or ideas, and you'd like to communicate via email, talk to any number of people around, and they will be glad to give you my email. It's definitely not a secret, and I'm always open to discussion with people. Again, what I say is not necessarily the truth. It's just my understanding of the nature of the universe at this moment. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.